Stress has been called the disease of modern society. A new epidemic apparently brought about by the pace of modern life, the pressure to succeed, increasing competition and job insecurity.
When you're stressed, you tend to be irritated with people and you snap at people more than you would normally.
I found myself waking up from time to time with the first thought being work. Yeah, I'd take it home with me.
Generally speaking, the average person will not thrive for long periods of time with excessive exposure to stress.
An estimated 60 million working days are now lost each year to stress-related conditions at an annual cost of about £7 billion. There are now more medicines than ever to alleviate the symptoms of stress, and stress counselling has become a big business. So what is this thing called stress? Why is it bad for us? And what's the best way of managing it? A massively increased workload, coupled with increasing complaints and physical assaults, have made teaching a much more difficult and stressful job. Teachers now have the lowest post-retirement life expectancy of any profession.
Teaching today is quite stressful. You find there's more and more work to do, more and more expectations from both the students and from the other members of staff and management, so I think it's becoming more and more stressful.
Teaching today is a challenge, from classroom management to delivering new specifications.
Teaching, I wouldn't say, is particularly the word to use. It's more crowd control a lot of the time.
Teachers, like many other groups, are now reporting much higher rates of stress. But what is stress? How do psychologists define it?
Psychologists mean by stress any pressure or fear or anxiety that an individual may be feeling and that actually impinges upon their performance.
Stress is the whole process. It's the interaction of things that we find stressful in the environment and our response to it.
These can themselves be physical events, such as being frightened by noises or something like that, or they can be events brought on by other people, typically things that other people do that annoy us or make us uncomfortable or threaten us in some way or another.
This is not what I asked for.
Then what did you ask for?
You have got the guidelines. You have got the guidelines. This is your coursework. I can't do it for you. If I try to do it for you,
what to do.
but you know what to do because you have the guidelines. We've been through this. Girls, I am talking.
Yes, we've been through it. I know
Tanya, will you please get on with your work? The idea of league tables, and you have to make certain percentages of results with your students and you need to improve consistently through the years. So that puts a lot of pressure on teachers because they feel like they are responsible for their students' grades.
Some examples of stress are butterflies in the stomach, headaches, feeling a bit nauseous, sweaty palms, your back might be aching, all sorts of physiological, psychological and mental responses to stress.
Now, can somebody tell me what break-even analysis means? What? Break-even analysis. We went through it yesterday. Do you remember? No. We were here yesterday. I feel frustrated that I can't get my message through to them. They have their own agenda, being kids, but it is very frustrating and does make me quite angry when I can't seem to get them to understand why they're there.
I do find myself getting quite angry sometimes. I'm frustrated by a lot of the bureaucracy, a lot of the expectations of other people, because quite often it's virtually impossible to meet those expectations.
I'm actually quite a laid-back character, so I tend not to get angry. I tend to let it sort of fester inside me.
So why is too much stress bad for us? It seems that to answer this question, we've got to go back in time, a long, long way.
Stress affects our health. It's a very basic evolutionary physiological response, the fight or flight response to stress, which when we were caveman or woman running around on the planet was fine. So if we were going to fight the saber-toothed tiger, then our blood would be thicker than normal. So if the saber-toothed tiger injured us, we would lose less blood and it would clot quicker. But certainly we haven't now got the ability to necessarily at work suddenly start shouting and fighting with somebody. So these constant levels of stress and thick blood running around our body may lead to coronary heart problems.
So physiological changes that take place when we're stressed are the kinds of changes that would take place to enable us to defend ourselves. And if we are then not called upon to engage in the kind of physical activity that these substances are preparing us to engage in, then this can lead to a deleterious build-up over the longer term.
So exposure to stress causes changes in our body that can undermine its defences, making illness more likely. It seems ironic that mechanisms in the body that were once a major factor in our survival could now be a major factor in producing our sickness.
I get colds quite easily. I just can't seem to get rid of them. I suffer with muscle spasms in my neck.
Feeling tired a lot of the time, feeling a bit restless from time to time, I suppose, are signs that it's getting to me. Yeah.
So if stress is bad for us, what can stress management do about it? So can the doctor help us cope with stress? Many people seem to think so. More than half of the appointments with GPs are now for social and emotional problems. And the multinational pharmaceutical companies are only too ready to provide remedies. There's now a mass of drugs to help lessen anxiety and depression, the main symptoms of stress.
Well, I just felt I wasn't coping. The classes were always on top of me. I was edgy, not sleeping very well, and the doctor just gave me these tablets.
Medication works by restoring the balance of chemicals in the brain, essentially. So one of the things that we can do with that, given that we now understand rather more than we used to about the brain chemicals that are responsible for the production of stress, is to use medications that, as it were, counter the effects of stress and bring the levels back to the kind of balance that would exist when we are in a relatively unstressed situation.
The tablets were brilliant at first. I felt a lot calmer and I felt I was back in control.
But behind the stress-free smiles on the pharmaceutical ads lies another story.
I think there are two main classes of drawback to medicating for stress. The first is a problem with addiction, because all kinds of psychoactive substances are known to be addictive.
Drugs can be helpful in extreme cases in the short term, but are rarely helpful over a longer term because we become dependent on them and they don't help us to form our own effective coping strategies.
Over 1 million people in Britain are now dependent on tranquilizers of one sort or another.
It was only after a couple of months that I really think that they lost their effect.
The other difficulty is a difficulty with what's called tolerance, that we become accustomed to taking medications, and over time, depending on the type of medication, a given dose becomes less effective than it previously was, in which case what one needs in order to achieve the same relief of symptoms is an increasing dose of the medication.
But unfortunately, the medication isn't attacking the stressors. A stressor in our life may be a boss who shouts at us at work a lot. We may take medication to make us feel better, but what we really need to be doing is addressing the stressor, the boss who shouts at us.
Psychological approaches to stress now offer an alternative to medication.
When we talk about psychological approaches to stress, what we are talking about is the possibility of relieving stress essentially by having somebody sympathetic to talk to. And what this reflects, I think, is the significance of other people as causal factors in the incidence of stress. So psychotherapy for stress involves developing appropriate relationships with people, and it is those relationships which can be responsible for reduction in stress.
Psychological stress management programs are built on this key idea of providing a sympathetic ear and trying to help people cope better with the things that are stressing them.
Stress management programs are designed, first of all, short-term deal with the stress responses, but ultimately stress management programs are really about getting to the core of what are the stressors that are actually triggering the stress responses.
How do these stress management programs actually work? We decided to find out by inviting stress management experts into the college where we were filming.
Oh, hi. Hi, David. I'm Rona Short from Action on Stress.
Good to see you.
The stress counsellors begin by meeting the staff in groups.
We've been invited into the college to help you look at stress levels. The principal's invited us in following your recent inspection, as he thought you could probably do with a little bit of extra support. Now, there's quite a lot of evidence nowadays that teachers are experiencing much more stress than they used to.
But how do they find out who's stressed and how much stress they have?
What I want to do is to hand you all a fairly lengthy questionnaire.
Stress is measured via a number of different ways. One way, certainly a commonly occurring way, is through certain questionnaires, and we can measure stress via chronic work or non-work events, through episodic work or non-work events, through stressful life events.
I know it's a bit long, but it'll help us find out what's going on.
In the questionnaire, respondents are given a number of identical questions and a number of possible answers. They tick the one that's closest to their own view or experience. However, some social scientists claim that this method is not really valid, as it lacks depth, and people may actually interpret the same question differently.
But part of the answer to are these questions valid and reliable, for me, is buried inside, well, if they help the person to identify and hence tackle and deal with some of the stressful issues in their life, then that is the validity and reliability.
As far as the questionnaire is concerned, that's the tool that helps us to identify the areas that are most stressful in people's lives. But I think that may not be the only tool that's used. We also talk to the people in quite a lot of depth as to where they perceive their main stress areas to be. And it's sort of a negotiated thing between the two of us, really, to decide which areas of their lives we can help them with.
The questionnaires were taken away for analysis. 2 weeks later, the stress counsellors returned to the college with their results. Their analysis has shown high levels of reported stress in over a quarter of the college staff. So what have stress management techniques actually got to offer to our stress teachers?
Hi, Kirsty. We've analysed your questionnaire, and your levels of stress seem to be higher than normal. But does that surprise you?
No, not really.
Well, we'd like to help you find ways to reduce this.
One approach in stress management involves trying to reduce stress by helping people change their behaviour.
The behavioural approach to stress recognises that in the final analysis, to some extent, we are what we do.
You know, I just don't get the time really, because I'm sort of working and then working at home and rushing around. I just don't seem to have the time, to be honest.
It seems to me, from what you're saying and what we've seen in your questionnaire, that your work does take up nearly all your time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that any of the sort of techniques that we recommend to you, you're going to say, I can't fit it in, or I can't do it. So one thing I've been thinking that might help you is time management.
Time management techniques involve helping people to organise their tasks, set goals, and alter the way their working days are scheduled.
What I'd be keen to do is to sit down and have a look at your week's programme, what you do each day, and try and find ways of cutting down the time that the tasks take, in order to give yourself more time, if possible, for other things.
That would be great if you could.
We could have a look at that.
Yeah.
Other behavioural methods range from things like assertiveness training, social skills development and anger management, to things like relaxation techniques, massage and exercise.
Can I ask you about your exercise programme?
I don't really do any exercise, I'm afraid.
Perhaps, have you thought about trying a gym?
However, for most psychologists, behavioural techniques are not enough. They have to be combined with cognitive strategies.
A cognitive approach to stress is saying, well, the difficulties that stressors cause us are that they change the way that we think about the world.
There are many times in classroom situations where I just feel I've had enough, I can't handle it. So I make some excuse up where I sort of say, oh, I've just remembered I need this piece of equipment, so I leave the room.
If behaviour is caused by inappropriate thoughts, then the way to deal with the problem behaviour is to change the thoughts.
So, for instance, some people may argue that there is no stress, it's only that we perceive the situation as stressful that causes the stress. So we need to look at our own perceptions and our own cognitive responses, perceptions to what stress might be.
No, I've been feeling quite stressed.
Well, we need to find ways to help you reduce this. And one of the ways people find helpful is through counselling. Can I ask you, have you ever considered counselling?
I have from time to time, but never really had the courage to step forward and request some form of counselling. But I have from time to time, yes.
In some ways, I've got strategies with which to avoid the stress. I'm not sure I want to confront the stress that I'm under.
There are techniques in psychology that can help you increase your ability to cope with stress. Things like stress inoculation.
Irving Janis identified battlefield inoculation back as far as the First World War, where new recruits were put into increasingly volatile situations. So that then prepared them for the battlefield, so they didn't necessarily fall apart during the pinnacle of the battle. Stress inoculation is a similar process, trying to identify some of the stressors in the person's life and trying to, through increasing exposure, getting them to talk about it, getting them to talk about how they felt during these particular stress responses. So through increased exposure to the stressors in a safe environment, the person slowly becomes desensitized, and really we're tackling their perception of what the stressful event may be.
However, not all teachers who filled in the questionnaire said they were stressed. Some reported high levels of job satisfaction and showed little sign of stress-related symptoms. What can be learned from these differences? What distinguishes the stressed from the unstressed? Do the unstressed have personality traits that make them more hardy?
Hardiness was identified as just a personality profile of people put under the same amounts of stress as other people, but actually fall ill less of the time. So our own ability to withstand stress, it's a very individual ability.
This issue was researched by Kobaska and her associates in the United States. In a comparative study of executives, she found that the hardier, less stressed ones had greater belief in their ability to control the things that happened to them, showed more commitment to the things they were doing, and were more inclined to see change as a challenge rather than a threat.
From the minute I get here, I seem to just have lessons where the kids are badly behaved and I can't see to control them.
What we'd like to do is to recommend you for a course of cognitive counselling and to start you off with a series of 6 sessions.
One of the aims of stress management courses will be to increase people's hardness or ability to actually withstand stress. And a lot of what we might identify as change management programs in organisations are really attempting to increase employees' ability to withstand fairly rapid change within the workplace.
Behavioural and cognitive strategies tend to be individualistic. But in stress management, it's also important to look at things outside the individual. Many studies have shown that the more social support people have, the more likely it is they'll be able to cope with stress. So how can this be applied to our case study?
Sometimes we target the individual when we should be targeting the organisation or the stressful conditions in the environment rather than pathologising individuals.
For instance, the college could look at its organisational structure, could look at work design and job design, and also start treating employees as individuals and focusing the kind of work they do around the kind of person they are. So the organisation that the employee works for plays as big a part as the individual.
One thing that I would like to ask you is about the support that you get day to day at college through your colleagues and the senior management.
The support system, or there is a support system in place. However, it should run effectively in theory, but with similar amounts of stress and workload placed upon everyone within this system, it's very difficult to expect some form of effective implementation. So I wouldn't expect my line manager to always be as thoughtful or to always be as helpful, because he has the same problems as I do.
So it may be that one thing we need to do is try to improve the support systems at college. We can look at individual things that you can do to help yourself, but we also need to look at you in the work context as well, and perhaps start some sort of support system here.
Stress management isn't a magic wand. It can't just make problems go away. It often involves compromise, working on what can be changed and coming to terms with what can't.
At the end of the day, you can't twist a student's arm and make them revise for an exam.
The whole school needs to look at its behaviour, but I don't see any outside bodies coming in to help with that.
I would say to the teachers watching this video, focus on the aspects of the job that you really enjoy and that are really important to you, and build those up into a bigger part of the job than maybe they are. The things that really do get to you and stress you out, talk to your colleagues about those issues, share them with other people, create support networks, and at the end of the day, inoculate yourself against those things that actually are getting you down.
There are many strategies in stress management, and in this video we've looked at just 3. Helping people change their behaviour, helping people alter their perceptions of things, and improving social support systems within organisations.
We also know there's greater absenteeism, that many teachers are suffering stress-related illnesses, and some are taking early retirement if that's possible. Now what we'd like to do is to try to help you before it reaches that sort of stage.
These stress management techniques have become increasingly popular, and the number of stress counsellors has doubled in the last 10 years.
Our main objective is to help you with your general health and well-being.
But have things gone too far? Are we being turned into a nation of stress addicts? After all, our grandparents and great-grandparents got through World War II without stress counsellors.
Yes, I've heard that argument quite a bit, and my feeling is that people didn't manage. People that didn't manage very well had problems and they were brushed under the carpet. And there was no one really that they could turn to. And they couldn't really admit that they were having problems because everyone was coping, weren't they? But I think nowadays it's okay to say, I need help. And I need to talk to somebody, or these are the areas of my life that I'm finding difficult.
The benefits of stress management programs can be enormous. You have lower staff turnover, lower levels of absenteeism, higher levels of motivation, and it must be good for any organisation to have employees who actually are happy in their jobs and less stressed.
However, not all psychologists agree with this, and it's important to consider some of the criticisms of the rise of the stress management industry. Organisational psychologist Rob Briner argues that there's no scientific measure of stress, and little or no objective evidence for the effectiveness of stress management programs. To critics, the stress problem is a social construction, a creation of the stress management industry. Stress management experts come into organisations and they tell people that their problems are caused by stress. Rates of reported stress then go up, creating a demand for more stress counsellors. To justify themselves, these new stress counsellors discover even more stress, and the cycle reinforces itself.
There may be risks in the fact that this raised profile of the stress industry is turning many employees into stress addicts, and every employee in a particular organisation may actually end up suffering from stress because it happens to spread through an organisation like wildfire.
Rather than helping people cope better, stress management can have the opposite effect. Believing they're suffering from an illness, stress, more people take time off work. Some then seek financial compensation, and this can be bad for society. The stress compensation culture is a bit like the lottery. A few win and everyone else loses. The large sums of money paid out to a few stressed teachers have to be found somewhere, and this means fewer books, computers and teachers in the schools. So psychological opinion on the rise of the stress management industry is divided. To its supporters, it's a long overdue recognition that people do need help in an increasingly complex and competitive world, and this is generally seen as beneficial.
And I think that whereas years ago people would hide it, nowadays they don't need to, and we can help them to have more fulfilling lives.
What it does is help people sort out their lives.
Some people may indeed benefit from stress counselling, but to critics, the danger is that, like the drug therapies it's seeking to replace, stress counselling can also create dependence, as more and more of us are encouraged to see life itself as an illness that can't be managed without some form of expert help. The problem with this is that when the questionnaires have been analysed, the interviews are over, and the stress counsellors have packed up and gone, life's still there waiting for us, and at the end of the day, we've just got to live it ourselves in the best way we can.